PSG 1, Arsenal 0, and this brilliant Champions League season just continues to deliver. We may not have had as many goals in this match as what we have seen in prior rounds, but the quality is just absurd. This is two of the very best teams in world football right now, stacked with some of the very best players on the planet, just going head to head, and it makes for an incredible spectacle. In this game we saw spells where both teams were on top, they both had different spells of dominance, and we also saw a match where both teams were able to create chances. So the question is, how'd they do it? So we're going to start off with PSG because I felt, and I think you'll all agree, they did start the game better. They were the brighter team for the first 25, maybe even 30 minutes of the match. They started the game quite brightly and were playing well. They were manipulating the Arsenal high press. And the way that they were doing this was by taking advantage of Martin Odegaard. You see, Odegaard typically sort of starts as a central midfielder on paper, but out of possession when he's trying to press, he often comes forward to actually form another forward. He's often literally right alongside Trossard. So what PSG were trying to do was encourage that exact behaviour. They were trying to draw Odegaard out of this midfield position into this higher area up here. And one of the ways that they were able to do this was by building possession with more of a back three. So Hakimi on the right hand side, normally a right back, but he would actually push a little bit further forward to take Martinelli that way. And this means that Marquinhos, Paco and Mendes are now the back three for PSG, and that's going to encourage Trossard, Odegaard and Bukayo Saka to try and press them. Now the reason that PSG want to do this is because if Odegaard is high here, it means that Arsenal only have two central midfielders. So what PSG would do was move the ball towards the left-hand side of the defence. Bukayo Saka is going to come further forward to press because, you know, he's a good pressing forward. He presses with intensity. But in this game, he had quite a lot of ground to cover to actually get there. But he did still do it. He did put the hard yards in. The problem for Arsenal, though, was that PSG then manipulated these areas really well. You see, because Odegaard had been drawn higher, it meant that PSG actually had extra players here. Now, in other games, Arteta may have been a little bit bolder and pushed one of his centre-backs forward to join the midfield and literally go man for man all over the pitch. But sort of understandably so, in a massive Champions League tie, he didn't want to take that risk, so he kept his defenders just a little bit deeper, sort of connected across the back line, if you like. But that meant that these guys were outnumbered in the middle here. So what PSG then did really well was drag them and move them about, because they're 3 versus 2. They sort of toyed with the Arsenal midfield a little bit. So someone like João Neves on the right-hand side, he would push a little bit higher up the pitch to take Merino a little bit deeper. And then perhaps Declan Rice would follow Fabian Ruiz into these areas. And what PSG were doing was trying to pull some of these Arsenal defenders to this side of the pitch over here so that they could then try and find this space here. And like we've already said, that space is created by Hakimi running forward quite early, from Desiree Doué doing something similar, and also João Neves as well, moving Merino into these positions. And what Dembele would then do is drop off into these spaces. And, you know, the technical quality of this PSG side is an absolute joke. All you've got to do is look at the pass completion rate of the 3 midfielders. It's insane. They are phenomenal footballers, and they move the ball forward really well. And we literally saw it for the first goal. This exact pattern happening. PSG moving the ball down the left-hand side. You can see runners taking the Arsenal players into areas they don't want to go. And then Dembele finds himself in a little pocket of space in the middle of the pitch. And basically, there was no one really responsible for marking him at this point, because like we've already said, the centre-backs didn't want to go. So PSG were able to pick the ball up and attack from there and score the goal. Now that pattern of play was really effective from PSG. It allowed them to move through the Arsenal high press, which is not easy to do. Arsenal, for me, are the best pressing team in the world. I do believe that. But PSG, for the first 20-25 minutes, made it look quite easy. But this is why I love elite level football with top tactical managers, because what Arteta does after about 30 minutes into the game, he makes a slight tweak to his pressing structure. And he changes Odegaard's positioning. So rather than Odegaard initially being up high, sort of in this kind of off-balance 4-3-3 sort of thing, he actually went a little bit deeper onto Vitinha in midfield, and Trossard, rather than just marking one of the centre-backs, actually now played between the two centre-backs. So why does this change things? Well, because as PSG try and play out from the back, they move the ball towards the left-hand side. Because Odegaard is now central, Arsenal are not overloaded in this position. So PSG do not have the spare man in here. It's literally 3 versus 3. And if you look at the physicality of the Arsenal 3, you would imagine they are going to be quite strong and quite effective there, particularly Rice and Marino, very physical players. But even Odegaard is quite strong physically for the type of player that he is. And this really shored up Arsenal's defensive play. It made it much more difficult for PSG to move through them. Because even if Dembele did still drop in to make an overload, there wasn't really anywhere for him to go with the ball because Arsenal were now crowding the centre much more effectively. So Arteta deserves credit for this, for making that change halfway through the first half to basically stop the PSG onslaught, because it was like that early on. PSG finding it quite easy to move through Arsenal. The change from Arteta stopped that, and it got Arsenal right back in the game. So with Arsenal now back in the game, the question was, could they themselves take the ball, play through the phases and create chances in the final third? And the answer was yes and no. In moments they could move through. On other occasions they found it quite difficult. We'll start off with the shape that they were using though, because David Raya played a big part in possession on the ball, because his positioning between the two centre-backs allowed the two centre-backs to split further apart, and that is going to be very important. We'll come back to that in just a second. What PSG are going to try and do though is use Desiree Doué on the right hand side, sort of between two players here. Kvaratskhelia on the left doing something similar, and typically what PSG like to do is they'll go man for man with you in midfield, which is going to be important. Give us 1 second. And Dembele will play between the two centre-backs. So let's just move Raya deeper 1 second. Dembele is a player which presses with an incredible intensity. It's massively underrated the way that he does this. So say Kyoyo's got the ball, Dembele will press him, but then as the ball goes across to Saliba, Dembele will continue to press. He works that hard. He works with that greater intensity that it means that PSG can press with one less player, because Dembele basically presses like two players, which is an amazing asset to have for PSG, right? It's a brilliant pressing player. This is what elite managers these days are absolutely crying out for. So Dembele deserves a lot of credit for that. However, whilst he may press like two players, he is still only one player. He is still only one set of legs. There is only so much ground a man can cover, right? And what Arsenal did quite well and quite effectively was that positioning of David Raya, because he moved into this position here, allowing the centre-backs to go a little bit further apart. And for Dembele, that now makes life really difficult to cover both of them and also Raya. So rather than being 1 versus 2, you could argue that he's actually now 1 versus 3 in this position here. Now, what Arsenal done from here was then tinkered with the positioning of the fullbacks. So Lewis Skelly, rather than playing at left-back, was coming into midfield here. And there's a moment in the game which, you know, if this doesn't capture modern football, I don't know what does. Because we see two right-backs tackling each other literally dead in the middle of the pitch. Just a slight side note, but it sort of captures the game these days. But anyway, Lewis Skelly inverting from the left-hand side, moving from this position inside the pitch here. Declan Rice then drops deeper into a double pivot. The problem for PSG here is, like I said, Dembele sort of 1v3, which makes the job of the next lot, if you like, behind them a little bit more difficult. Because what PSG typically like to do is go man for man in midfield. So that'll be Neves on Marino, Vitinha on Odegaard, and Ruiz on Rice. The problem here is the superior physical traits of the Arsenal midfield, but also the fact that Arsenal have now dropped Lewis Skelly into this position as well. So the question for PSG now is, who is supposed to pick him up? Now, at times, PSG were incredibly aggressive. So Martinelli would be further forward. So Hakimi would actually come all the way to press Skelly, and, you know, PSG would shift to a back three and be very aggressive in a man-to-man press in these deeper positions. The problem for PSG was the quality of the Arsenal midfield. Declan Rice and Lewis Skelly in particular have an immense ball-carrying ability. And we saw two moments of this which really exposed the whole PSG structure, because I say this all the time, right? Man-to-man pressing systems are great until you lose a man-to-man battle. Because if we're man-to-man all over the pitch, right, if I lose my battle here, now what? You know, Lewis Skelly's suddenly got time on the ball, and the rest of the PSG players have now got a decision to make. Do they stick to their man-to-man approach, but that means Lewis Skelly has time? Or do they close him down, but that's going to allow someone else to have more space? And we saw this in two moments. First of all, Lewis Skelly in the first half, picking the ball up in the middle of the pitch, turning brilliantly, and then driving forward at the PSG defence. And we also saw it in the second half as well. Declan Rice with immense power, driving forward through the PSG midfield, and then sliding that ball through. The problem for Arsenal, for me, was whilst they did progress the ball well up until the final third, once they were actually in these attacking positions, you know, if we just move the whole team up a little bit, once they were actually in these areas in the final third, they felt a little bit flat to me. I don't know that there was enough for Arsenal. We saw Bukayo Saka sort of getting on the ball, and always trying to make things happen as he does, sometimes moving inside onto his left foot. And I would encourage Arteta to try and do that more, to try and get Saka into those positions, because I think he can be really effective from there. But the problem for Arsenal was the quality of the front three, I feel, isn't as strong, technically, as the PSG front three. The PSG front three felt like in any moment that they could change the game with an amazing bit of skill or combination play or dribbling or an amazing finish, something like that. For Arsenal, it felt a little bit dependent on Bukayo Saka, and that's a problem. It's a slight problem. It's not a huge problem. You know, Arsenal do 95% of the game very, very well. It's just that last little bit they haven't quite got at the moment. And, you know, they may not have that until the transfer window. We don't know. We'll see what they do with recruitment. But it's just in these big games. And we're talking massive European nights here where the games are incredibly tight. Both teams are pressing pretty well. Both teams are defending well. Both teams are passing well. They're attacking well. These games are always going to be tight. And sometimes tactics don't matter. And that might sound odd after I've just spent the past 10 minutes talking about tactics. But sometimes player quality can be that decisive moment. Dembele had that bit of quality, that moment of quality in just that 20-minute spell where PSG were on top. And that moment was enough. That is how brutal elite level football is. And Champions League is elite. It is the best level of football you will see anywhere on the planet, in my opinion. So that's just the issue for Arsenal. The good news for Arsenal, though, if you are an Arsenal fan, you're still very much in this tie. We saw Arteta within the football match, which is very impressive, by the way, within the match coming up with solutions. It wasn't like he had to wait until the second leg to come up with a plan. He affected the game about 30 minutes in. He changed Arsenal's approach off the ball, and it got Arsenal right back in that game. And for the next hour, you know, 30th to 90th, I think it was a very, very even game. Arsenal had spells where they were better. PSG had spells as well. That's always going to be the case when there's quality players on both teams. Arsenal, what they will need to do next week is just try and find that extra bit of quality in the final third, that extra attacking spark. And also, of course, set pieces are also a huge weapon for Arsenal. So get one or two of those right, and they're very much in this tie. Arsenal are absolutely fine. It's not ideal being one goal down. It's, of course, not ideal, especially now going away from home. But I think Arsenal still have every chance. As for PSG, for me, they are one of the favourites for the Champions League right now. I think they are an amazing team. Who do I think is going to go through? I couldn't tell you. I would probably just edge for PSG, just because of the fact that they've got the lead. But trust me, Arsenal are still very much in this tie, and we will see next week what happens. If you want to see that video next week, breaking down the second leg, make sure to subscribe, like the video, get notifications on, and also leave a little comment saying that you want to see that video and that you are enjoying this different style of content. But apart from that, we are finished for today. PSG take the advantage in the first leg, but it is still all to play for. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.